What if the woman everyone ignored turned out to be the only person he ever truly loved and the key to a secret that could tear his powerful family apart? The room was thick with silence, interrupted only by the slow, mechanical beep of a heart monitor. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort, but warned like the quiet before a storm. Daniel Whitmore, once hailed as one of the most powerful and influential businessmen in America, now lay pale and frail in a massive four-poster bed. His master bedroom had been transformed into a private hospital suite, complete with machines that blinked and buzzed, and nurses who moved quietly like ghosts. His family filled the room. Brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews, all clad in designer black, their eyes filled with tears that seemed just a little too rehearsed. They crowded in, not for love, but for legacy. Every glance they exchanged was heavy with calculation. Daniel was a man whose will would change the course of fortunes. But in the back corner of the room sat a woman no one paid attention to. She wasn't wearing black. She wasn't crying loudly. She simply sat there, silent, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Her name was Naomi Carter. And no one knew that for the last 8 years, she had been his wife. She had slipped into the mansion an hour before, unnoticed in the chaos. Her entrance was quiet, her movements gentle. She didn't want to cause a scene. She only wanted one last moment with the man who had once changed her life with a smile and a promise. When the doctor called the family into the hallway for a quick update, Naomi stood up and walked toward the bed. Her hands trembled as she reached for his. "I'm here, my love," she whispered. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, and when they found her, they softened. A faint smile stretched across his worn face. "Olivia," he breathed. Naomi didn't correct him. "I promised I'd come," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll always keep my promises." His fingers gripped hers with a strength that surprised her. 8 years wasn't enough. "I should have told them. I should have—" "Shh," she soothed, brushing a tear from his face. "We had our reasons." I never regretted a single moment. The door creaked open. A tall man stepped in, Richard Whitmore Jr., Daniel's eldest brother, and the one most likely to seize control of the family estate. He stopped short when he saw Naomi at Daniel's side. "Who are you?" he snapped. "This is a private moment." Daniel's voice cut through the tension like a razor. "Richard, this is Naomi." "She's my friend," Naomi interrupted, gently placing her hand over Daniel's. "Just an old friend." Richard looked her over with suspicion, then nodded stiffly. 5 minutes. "Then I must ask you to leave." Once the door closed again, Daniel turned his face toward her with sadness in his eyes. "Even now, you're still protecting them." "I'm protecting your peace," she said. "This isn't the moment to fight." "It's the moment to say goodbye." He looked away for a long moment, then he said, "The letter, in my desk. Mickelme attorney has everything else." "They'll know soon enough." "I know," she nodded, swallowing her grief. "You need to rest now." "I love you," he whispered. "I always will." "Promise me something." "Anything," she replied, her voice cracking. "Stay for the reading. Stay, and face them. Let them see you, really see you." She paused. Her instinct was to vanish like a shadow. She was used to hiding, but then she nodded. "I promise." The family came back into the room moments later. Some stared at her, others ignored her, but no one truly saw her. Naomi returned to her chair in the corner and sat as Daniel's breathing grew slower, more ragged. She didn't speak. She didn't cry loudly. But every breath he took was a stitch in the tapestry of a life they had woven in secret. And when that final breath left his lips, no one saw her hand tremble. No one saw the way she covered her mouth to keep from crying out. No one realized that the woman who had just lost her husband had never been acknowledged as his wife. She slipped out before the family even realized. In the hallway, Naomi leaned against the wall. Her knees buckled slightly as the weight of everything crashed down on her. For 8 years, she had lived in the shadows, loved him quietly, supported him fiercely. Now, she had to grieve alone. A soft voice pulled her from the edge of despair. "You were important to him, weren't you?" Naomi turned to find a young woman standing nearby. Isabel Turner, Daniel's niece. Her eyes were rimmed red from crying, but her expression was gentle. "Yes," Naomi said softly. "I was." "He never talked about his personal life," Isabel whispered. "Always business, business and image," Naomi nodded. "He was complicated. But he had a good heart." "Are you coming to the funeral?" Isabel asked. Naomi hesitated. Then she remembered the promise. "Yes, and to the reading of the will." Isabel's brows lifted in surprise. "That's just for family." "I'll be there," Naomi said. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out the front doors of the Whitmore mansion. As she stepped into the fresh autumn air, she knew the days ahead would not be easy. But she had made a promise, and for love, she would keep it. The rain fell in gentle waves across the windows of Naomi Carter's small apartment. Outside, the city was alive with honking taxis and flashing lights, but inside her world stood still. The funeral was tomorrow, the reading of the will right after that. She hadn't stepped foot in the Whitmore estate in years until yesterday, when she walked in as a stranger and held Daniel's hand for the last time. She sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the simple black dress folded neatly before her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she ran them over the fabric. She had bought it 2 years ago, not for a funeral, but for an awards dinner Daniel had wanted to bring her to. At the last minute, he cancelled. "My brother's going to be there," he had explained. "And if they see you, it'll start a war." Naomi hadn't said anything that night, but the memory stung now more than ever. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. A text from Emma Langford, the attorney's assistant, confirming your seat at the will reading, 3 p.m., Whitmore Law, downtown. Dress professionally. Expect family tension. Naomi took a deep breath. She'd made a promise. She was going to show up not for money, not for drama, but because Daniel had asked her to. Because he had died asking the world to finally see her. Later that night, Naomi pulled out an old leather box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were 8 years of a hidden love story. Polaroids of Daniel grinning with a drink in hand, handwritten notes slipped under her door after long business trips, and a photo booth strip from a weekend in Boston when they pretended to be just another couple. She touched the corner of a faded picture where Daniel held her hand beneath a cherry blossom tree. He had laughed that day, like he hadn't in years. "I wish I could freeze this moment," he'd whispered. And maybe, in a way, he had. The next morning came too quickly. St. Augustine Church was already crowded when Naomi arrived. Men in dark suits shook hands with quiet solemnity. Women dabbed their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. The pews filled with politicians, executives, and socialites, all there to say goodbye to a man they knew as a mogul. Few, if any, had ever seen him as just Daniel. Naomi sat alone at the back, not because she wanted to, but because that was where she belonged in their eyes. Her presence drew whispers. Heads turned. One woman leaned over to her friend and murmured, "She's not family, is she?" She ignored them. When the pastor stepped to the podium, his words felt hollow to her ears. He spoke of Daniel's success, his contributions to the community, his leadership, but not of his laughter, not of how he played piano off-key after 2 glasses of wine, not of how he once cried when they lost a baby in their first year together. Naomi didn't need a eulogy. She already carried his story inside her. After the final hymn, she waited for the crowd to filter out. She didn't want to confront the Whitmores just yet. But as she turned to leave, a voice called out softly, "Ms. Carter?" She turned. It was Michael Bennett, Daniel's lawyer. "Ready for the reading?" he asked. Naomi nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." An hour later, she sat at the far end of a long, polished table inside the Whitmore law offices. The room was filled with Daniel's siblings, nieces, nephews, and family lawyers. Every chair was occupied, every expression unreadable. No one offered her a seat at first until Emma pulled out a chair beside her, deliberately. "Thank you," Naomi whispered. Michael cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Mr. Daniel Whitmore. I will read it in full as instructed." For the first 20 minutes, it was routine. Property, trusts, donations to museums and universities. To each sibling, Daniel had left generous yet carefully measured gifts. No one spoke, no one reacted. They had expected this. Then Michael turned to a separate sealed envelope. "To Ms. Naomi Carter," he said. Daniel left the following personal message to be read aloud. The room went still. Michael opened the letter and began, "To my Naomi, if you're hearing this, I'm already gone. I hate that I left you with a mess, but you deserve to be seen now, even if I didn't have the courage to make it happen while I was alive. I want everyone in this room to know that Naomi Carter is not just an old friend. Was my wife. For 8 years, we lived a life most of you never saw, because I hid her. I was ashamed, not of her, but of you. I knew what you'd say, how you'd twist things, how you'd question her motives. But Naomi never wanted my money. She wanted me. And I failed her in so many ways by not standing beside her publicly, but in this final act, I will not fail her again. Everything that is mine, that is not legally bound to family holdings, goes to Naomi. The home in Maine, the condo in Manhattan, the beachfront property in Belize. My private accounts, my personal investments, and to my family. I hope one day you'll understand. She was the best part of me, Daniel." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Whitmore's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "This is outrageous. A woman no one's ever met suddenly inherits everything? We should contest this." "I expected that," Michael said calmly. "But Daniel updated this will 6 months ago. It was witnessed, notarized, and accompanied by a psychiatric evaluation confirming full mental clarity. You can try to challenge it, but you'll lose." Naomi's fingers were ice cold. But her back was straight. She didn't flinch, not anymore. Someone at the table scoffed. Another muttered under their breath. But Emma turned and said softly, "He loved you. It's clear." Naomi looked down at her hands. "And I loved him." Even in the dark. As she stood to leave, she caught a glimpse of herself in the conference room window. No longer the invisible woman in the corner. She had kept her promise. And finally the world saw her. The beach house in Montauk had never felt so quiet. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of the deck, staring out at the Atlantic Ocean. The waves rolled in, calm and steady, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in her life. Behind her, the modest white-shingled house held echoes of laughter, lullabies, whispered promises. It had been their sanctuary for years. A hidden life away from the cameras, the investors, the scrutiny of Daniel Whitmore's legacy. Now it was a place of reckoning. Inside, 4-year-old Sophia was napping. Her favorite stuffed rabbit lay beside her, worn at the ears, still damp from a recent wash. Naomi had tucked her in with quiet hands and a mind full of noise. She hadn't told her daughter the full truth. Not yet. How do you explain to a child that her father, the man who held her when she was sick and made silly pancake shapes every Sunday morning, was now a ghost that people wanted to erase? The will had been read. The family had reacted like Naomi feared they would, with suspicion, disbelief, and quiet rage. But Daniel had made his intentions clear, and for the first time in years, Naomi didn't have to hide. Still, freedom had a strange flavor. It wasn't sweet. Not yet. That afternoon, she walked through the house slowly, taking in every detail. The framed picture by the entryway. Daniel holding Sophia on his shoulders during her first birthday, cake on his tie and joy in his eyes. The piano in the corner, where he used to play jazz standards late at night when he couldn't sleep. The closet that still held his coat, his cologne faint on the fabric. She stopped in the living room and pulled open a drawer in the side table. Inside was a manila envelope labeled in Daniel's handwriting, "For Naomi, in case." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, deeds, account numbers, passwords, a handwritten letter. "Naomi, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I was always trying to shield you from the worst of them, from the media, from my family, from myself. But now you have to face them, and I hate that. This house is yours. It always was. You made it a home. I just showed up and played the part of the fool in love, which I was, hopelessly. Inside this envelope is everything you'll need to protect what we built. But more than that, I want you to remember what we had wasn't fake. It was real. You taught me how to love quietly. Now it's your turn to fight loudly. And for Sophia, tell her everything. All of it. Don't sugarcoat me. I was a coward in some ways. But she should know that I was never ashamed of her. You two were the only thing that ever made sense. Yours forever, Daniel." Naomi pressed the letter to her chest and sank onto the couch. She didn't cry. She had done enough of that. Instead, she started making phone calls. The first was to Michael Bennett. "I found something," she said simply. "It proves he prepared me for this. Can you come tomorrow morning?" "Of course," he replied. The second call was harder. She dialed a number she had avoided for years. Emma Langford answered on the second ring. "Naomi?" "I think it's time we talk," Naomi said. Not just as people who were both in that room yesterday, but as people who both loved him. There was a pause. "I'll be there in the morning." The following day, they gathered at the beach house. Michael looked through the documents and nodded. "This solidifies everything. It may not stop the family from filing a challenge, but it strengthens our position." Emma sat quietly beside Naomi, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The beach wind blew through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Finally, Emma spoke. "I always wondered why he smiled more when he talked about his weekends," she said. "He never gave details. Just said he had plans. I thought it was another executive retreat or private fishing trip." Naomi looked at her. "It was breakfast on the porch. Finger painting. Little things." Emma smiled faintly. "Those sound like better retreats." Naomi studied her. "Why are you really here, Emma?" Emma didn't flinch. "Because I want to help. Because I think the way my family is handling this is cruel. And because I loved my uncle too. Maybe not in the way you did, but I respected him. And if he loved you, then I owe it to him to get this right." That night, Naomi lit a single candle and sat by the fireplace after Sophia had gone to bed. She didn't feel strong. But strength isn't always about feeling. Sometimes it's just continuing. Daniel had given her the blueprint. Now it was her turn to follow through. The waves outside the Montauk beach house thrashed against the shore as if echoing Naomi Carter's thoughts. The storm had rolled in faster than the weather report had predicted, but the real storm, the one she feared, was already brewing inside the Harrison estate. She stood in the kitchen that morning, preparing oatmeal for Sophia, now 4 years old, and beginning to ask more difficult questions. "Why don't we live in the big house with the other Harrisons?" she had asked yesterday, her big brown eyes blinking up with innocent curiosity. Naomi had smiled and said, "Because this little house is filled with big love." But she knew it wouldn't be enough for long. After breakfast, Michael Bennett arrived. He brought updates, none of them surprising. "The family's filing an official motion to contest the will," he told her, placing a stack of papers on the counter. They're citing undue influence, emotional manipulation, and a so-called secret life. Naomi gave a small laugh without humor. They're calling me his secret, but he was the one hiding. Michael leaned forward, his voice low. They're going to dig, Naomi. Old relationships. Photos. Anything to create doubt. They've already reached out to that gossip site, the Social Report. Naomi's jaw clenched. Let them dig. I've lived in the light. They're the ones afraid of it. He gave her a small nod, impressed by her resolve. Still, when the door closed behind him, the silence in the house felt louder than ever. That evening, Emma Langford returned, the only member of Daniel's family who had dared step toward Naomi instead of away from her. Emma had brought a tote bag filled with documents she had found in Daniel's old home office, letters he had written but never sent, a file marked NJHS with notes and financial spreadsheets related to Sophia's trust fund. He had a plan, Emma said, spreading the papers across the dining table. But I think he was scared of his own family. He thought the company was all they cared about. Naomi stared at a sticky note Daniel had written years ago, probably late at night. Tell them before it's too late. Stop hiding. She deserves the world. I wish he'd done it sooner, Naomi whispered, before cancer forced the truth out. Emma reached across the table. He tried. I know it's not enough, but he tried. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just the wind rattling the windows and the ocean crashing in the distance. Naomi finally looked up. You saw how they treated us at the funeral. Marcus didn't even acknowledge Sophia. And Elizabeth, she couldn't even look me in the eye. They're scared, Emma said plainly. Not of you, of what you represent. That Daniel didn't need them to define him. That he found love without their permission. Naomi chuckled dryly. That's a kind way to say they're control freaks. Emma smiled. You said it, not me. They both laughed, but it faded quickly. Then Naomi stood and walked to the living room. On the mantel sat a picture of Daniel holding baby Sophia at the beach. His face was unshaven, relaxed, and utterly free, nothing like the tight-lipped, executive persona he showed the world. He promised me 5 years, she said softly. 5 years of privacy, then we'd go public. But when Sophia turned 3, everything fell apart. The merger. His father. Then the diagnosis. The window just closed. Emma stood beside her. And now? Naomi turned to her, eyes clear. Now I fight, not for money, for Sophia's place in the world. For her name. That night, Naomi sat alone after Sophia had gone to bed. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not legal documents. Not statements, but a letter to the Harrison family. I am not a scandal. I am not a stranger. I was Daniel's wife long before he became your brother, your son, your legacy. I held his hand when he got the diagnosis. I wiped his forehead through every round of chemo. I was there when he made the decision to keep his illness from you, not out of malice, but mercy. I buried the man you all loved from a distance. I buried the man I loved up close. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm not asking for your understanding. I am demanding your acknowledgement, because my daughter deserves to be seen, because your brother wanted her to be seen. The next morning, Naomi printed the letter and handed it to James Monroe, the family's longtime legal counsel. Distribute it in full, she said. And be sure the press gets a copy. He looked at her in surprise. You're going public? Naomi nodded. No more hiding? Not for me, not for Sophia. Later that afternoon, while Sophia napped, Naomi stepped outside to watch the sea. The sky had cleared. The ocean shimmered, stretching out like a road without end. Behind her, the world was about to erupt with questions, headlines, debates. But in front of her, the truth stretched as wide as the ocean. And she was ready to walk into it. The morning of the funeral broke with a quiet coldness, the sky an endless stretch of grey. Naomi Carter stood by her bedroom window in the penthouse, her black dress neatly laid out on the bed behind her. Sophia sat at the vanity, kicking her feet, her dark curls neatly brushed and tied with a velvet ribbon. "Mommy," Sophia asked gently, "will Daddy see us today?" Naomi turned slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Not the way he used to, baby." "But yes, he'll see us in his heart. He always does." They were preparing for what was meant to be a private Harrison family funeral, an event Naomi had not been invited to. But Daniel had made one thing painfully clear before his final breath: don't let them erase you. So today, she wouldn't be quiet. She wouldn't be hidden. She and Sophia would stand where they belonged. At the front, not in the shadows. Outside the cathedral, clusters of the elite gathered in solemn groups. Politicians, investors, journalists trying to stay invisible with their cameras lowered. When Naomi and Sophia stepped from the black car, a hush swept over the entrance like wind over glass. She held Sophia's hand tight and walked up the marble steps. Marcus Harrison, tall and imposing in a fitted black suit, met her at the top with a practiced smile that didn't touch his eyes. "This is a family ceremony," he said under his breath. "I'm aware," Naomi replied calmly. "That's why we're here." He glanced at Sophia, then back at Naomi. "Let's not make a scene." Naomi bent down beside her daughter and whispered, "Stay close to Mommy." Then she straightened and looked Marcus dead in the eye. The only scene would be keeping a grieving child from her father's funeral. Before he could answer, Elizabeth Harrison stepped forward from the shadows behind him. She said nothing, but placed a hand on Marcus's arm and gave a single short nod. Let them pass. Inside, the cathedral was bathed in stained glass light and the heavy silence of unspoken judgments. Naomi and Sophia took their place in the second row, across the aisle from the official family pew. Several of the Harrisons cast glances over their shoulders, whispers bouncing like cold echoes off stone. But then came a voice, soft and clear. "I saved this seat for you," Emma said, sliding over on the front bench. Naomi hesitated only a second before guiding Sophia forward. They sat down, shoulder to shoulder with Daniel's niece, the only one who had shown true grace since his death. The funeral itself was a polished production, a string quartet, a eulogy from Marcus that detailed Daniel's business conquests, philanthropic reach, and contributions to the Harrison legacy. But not once, not a single time did they mention his wife or child. Naomi sat still, a statue carved from dignity, her fingers clasped in Sophia's tiny hand. Only at the very end did anything break that silence. As the family rose to follow the casket out, Sophia tugged at Naomi's sleeve. "Can I give Daddy my picture now?" Naomi blinked. "Of course, baby." She led her to the casket where Sophia pulled out a folded piece of paper she'd kept tucked in her coat pocket all morning. A drawing crayons in soft hues of a tall man, a little girl, and a woman with brown curls. Above them, a sun smiled down. Sophia leaned in and whispered something too quiet for anyone to hear, then placed the drawing atop the polished wood. From across the cathedral, the gasp was audible. Olivia turned, expecting a reprimand, but no one moved. Even Marcus stood still, lips pursed, brow low. It was done. After the service, Naomi gathered Sophia and began to step away, until James, Daniel's attorney, appeared at her side. "The will reading is at 3 o'clock today," he said quietly. "Even with the family's objections?" "Especially with the family's objections," he said. It was Daniel's final instruction. Naomi gave a small nod. "We'll be there." Back at the penthouse, she changed into a more composed outfit, tailored but soft, elegant but assertive. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was going to take her place. The law firm's conference room was all glass and walnut, silent but tense. The Harrison family filled the seats around the table like members of a boardroom about to reject a hostile acquisition. Naomi walked in alone. Behind her, James gestured for her to take the seat at the head of the table. For a moment, She saw Elizabeth's eyebrows twitch, Catherine's mouth press flat, and Marcus shift stiffly in his chair. Then James began. The usual formalities came first: revocation of prior wills, identification of executors. Then came the bequests. To siblings, antique watches, small endowments, framed art; to nieces and nephews, educational trusts; to Sophia, Elizabeth Carter, full ownership of Harrison's shares in private firms, a trust fund of considerable size, and a lifelong property interest in the Montauk house and penthouse apartment; to Naomi Carter Harrison, all remaining assets not explicitly bequeathed, including stocks, properties, and artwork. And, James continued, a final statement to be read now. He unfolded a separate letter. To my family, I have made many decisions out of fear. Fear of confrontation, of judgment, of breaking a legacy that was never mine to protect. But the greatest love of my life was never a business deal. It was Naomi. It was Sophia. If you cannot accept them, then you cannot claim to know me. They are my family. My legacy, my truth, they deserve everything I failed to give them while I was alive. Let my death not be a continuation of silence. Let it be the start of acknowledgement. The room was stone still. Then Marcus muttered, "We'll be contesting that." James didn't flinch. "Then we'll see you in court." Naomi stood slowly, her voice calm. "This isn't about money." "You know that. But I will not allow Daniel's name to be used against the people he loved most." She looked down at her hands, steadier now than ever before. "For 8 years, I was his secret. For the rest of my life, I'll be his truth." And with that, she walked out of the room, not with anger, but with grace, the quiet, dignified kind that doesn't need applause. She didn't look back, because forward was where Daniel had always told her to go. And now, finally, she could. 2 days had passed since the funeral. The penthouse felt quieter than ever. Naomi Carter stood in the study Daniel had once guarded like a fortress. Now, with his passing, it felt less like a room of secrets and more like a space full of unresolved truths. Sophia was napping in the next room, her small arms curled around her favorite stuffed bunny. Naomi used the moment of stillness to open the drawer Daniel had once locked religiously. Inside was an envelope with her name in his familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Naomi, if you're reading this, then I am gone. And I am sorry for the silence I forced on you. Sorry for all the moments I made you a secret when you should have been my world. But this letter isn't only about regret. It's about power, and I need you to use it now." She sat down slowly, already feeling the tears form. "James has all the legal documentation. But this letter, and what's inside this drawer, is what will secure your future and Sophia's. Passwords, property deeds, a digital key to our investment accounts. I've spent the last 2 years transferring what I could in your name without setting off alarm bells with my family. I should have done more, sooner, but I was afraid. And now you're the one left to be brave." The back of the envelope contained a USB drive. Naomi inserted it into her laptop. A folder popped open, containing PDFs of bank accounts, trusts, a deed to the Montauk house in her name, a medical directive with Daniel's signature listing her as primary decision-maker, and even a video file. She hesitated, then clicked play. Daniel appeared on screen, vibrant and alive. His hair was fuller, his skin warm with health. This was recorded years before the cancer. "Naomi," he began, his voice soft. "If you're watching this, then I didn't keep my final promise. I always told you I'd stand by you. I told you I'd introduce you to my family, that I'd never let you raise our daughter in shadows, but I failed." He looked down, then up again, eyes misty. "This family I was born into, it worships control, image, legacy. but they never taught me the kind of legacy that matters most. Love, honesty, presence. You gave me that. You gave me Sophia. Naomi covered her mouth as she watched him, every word feeling like a goodbye she didn't get to hear in person. I'm not just leaving you assets. I'm leaving you this truth. If my family challenges you, which I know they will, show them this. Show the world. Tell Sophia her father loved her loudly, even if he lived quietly. When the video ended, Naomi sat in stunned silence. She hadn't just been given legal ammunition. She'd been handed emotional truth. This was what she would hold on to when the lawsuits came. And they would come. Marcus had made that clear in the reading room. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emma Harrison stood at the entrance, holding a paper bag with takeout containers. "I brought dinner," she said softly, "and I'd like to talk." Naomi stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen island. Naomi poured them both some sparkling water. Emma pulled something from her coat pocket, a small, framed photo. "This was from a trip we took when I was 10, Emma explained. "My uncle took me to the botanical gardens. We spent the whole afternoon talking about planets and how he wanted to see Mars before he died." Naomi smiled faintly. "He talked about space with Sophia too. Told her the brightest star would be him winking at her." Emma blinked back tears. "He changed around her. Around you." "I want you to know not everyone in this family is like Marcus." Naomi leaned in. "Then help me. Help Sophia have a real chance. Not just with the money, but with knowing where she came from." Emma reached across the table, her grip warm. "I will." The next morning, James called. "There's more," he said. "Daniel left another instruction, a meeting family only, at my office tomorrow night. He asked for it to happen after the funeral, but before any court motions were filed." Naomi was quiet. "They won't come." "They already confirmed," James replied. "And I think you should bring the video." She spent the rest of the day preparing, not just with lawyers, but emotionally. She rehearsed what she would say. She printed a transcript of the video. She wrote down every asset and document Daniel had secured in her name. And most importantly, she looked at Sophia sleeping and reminded herself what this was all for. The next evening, Naomi entered James's conference room first. She wore navy instead of black, sharp and unshakable. Her presence said one thing clearly: "I belong here." The Harrisons arrived in clusters. Marcus led the group, his jaw already clenched with suspicion. Elizabeth came next, more subdued than before. Catherine and Thomas followed, while Emma quietly took a seat near Naomi. James stood. "Per Daniel's instructions, this meeting is informal. No motions, no accusations, just a chance to hear the truth from him in his own words." He pressed play. The video unfolded in real time. Naomi didn't look at the screen. She watched the family. Marcus's hand twitched. Elizabeth's shoulders slumped. By the end, there were no words left to say. When the screen went black, Naomi stood. "I'm not asking for your approval," she said, voice steady. "I'm not even asking for your understanding. I'm telling you, I am Daniel's wife. Sophia is his daughter, and we are not leaving." She reached into her bag and placed copies of the documents before them. "You can fight this in court. But you'll lose, not because of what I say, but because of what Daniel already made clear." Marcus looked up, his voice tight. "You want everything." Naomi shook her head. "I already had everything. I had his love. What I'm doing now, this is just keeping his promises." Silence followed, long, sharp. Then, from the end of the table, Emma spoke. "She deserves to be heard, and Sophia deserves to be known." To Naomi's surprise, Elizabeth nodded slowly. "We can't undo what he built with her, but maybe we can stop pretending it didn't exist." No settlement was agreed upon that night, but the war shifted. Because now, the Harrison family had seen the one thing they never expected, the truth, and Naomi Carter was done hiding from it. The meeting had ended without shouting. That alone was a miracle. As Naomi Carter stepped out into the evening air, the chill wrapped around her like a warning. It wasn't over. No one had yelled, no one had agreed either. But for the first time, she'd spoken her truth with her head held high, and she'd done it with Daniel's voice behind her. Back at the penthouse, Naomi tucked Sophia into bed. The little girl was holding a drawing she'd made for her father, a picture of stars, and one very big, bright one with a smiley face in the middle. "Is Daddy watching us now?" Sophia asked sleepily. Naomi brushed a curl away from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby." Always. When she closed the door to Sophia's room, she found James waiting in the living room, reviewing a folder thick with legal documents. "They're regrouping," he said simply. "Marcus isn't finished." But the video rattled them. Naomi nodded. "They're not used to being challenged, or hearing Daniel speak with that kind of vulnerability," James added. Naomi walked over to the fireplace and stared at a photo of Daniel holding Sophia on her first birthday. "How long until they try to go around the will again?" "Soon," James admitted. "I've already heard whispers from Marcus's legal team. They're building a character attack. They'll try to paint you as manipulative, try to use your past against you." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Let them. You're sure?" "I lived in the shadows for 8 years, James," she said. "If they want to drag me into the light, fine. But they'll have to face who I really am and what Daniel really chose." A few days later, Naomi got a call from Emma Harrison. "My Aunt Elizabeth wants to meet you again," she said. "Privately, no lawyers." Naomi paused. "She's trying to gauge how much I'll bend." "No," Emma replied gently. "I think she's starting to remember she has a heart." They met for tea at a quiet Upper West Side cafe. Naomi wore a grey coat over a simple sweater dress. Elizabeth arrived 10 minutes late, dressed like she was headed to a board meeting. But her eyes looked tiredless, guarded than before. "I've reviewed the documents," Elizabeth said without preamble. "The will is airtight. The finances are unassailable. And that video—" She stirred her tea without drinking it. "I never knew that side of him," she whispered. Naomi said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes, silence says more than any retort. "You have to understand, Daniel was always the quiet one," Elizabeth continued. "He didn't rebel. He didn't argue. He just disappeared from our emotional lives, even as he stayed in the business." Naomi nodded. "He told me once that power in your family was gained by being quiet at the right time and loud at the right time. But mostly quiet." Elizabeth offered a sad smile. "That's not wrong." Naomi leaned forward. "Sophia is 4. She doesn't care about shares or inheritance, but she asks about her aunts. Her cousins. She wants to know why she only sees pictures of Daddy's family in magazines." Elizabeth looked up sharply. "She's a Harrison," Naomi said simply. "You can't change that, and I don't want to, but I won't let her grow up thinking she's not good enough to belong." Elizabeth's shoulders dropped. "And what would you want from me?" "A seat at the table," Naomi said. "A chance for Sophia to know the family she came from. Not through court rulings or articles, but through birthdays. Holidays, real moments." Elizabeth blinked quickly, then looked away. "I still remember the first time Daniel brought a telescope home," she said. "He was maybe 10. Said he wanted to discover something no one had seen before." Naomi smiled faintly. "He did." Later that week, Naomi received a hand-delivered envelope. It was from the Harrison family board of directors. They were offering a private settlement this time, not to erase her, but to negotiate her place. The terms included acknowledgement of Naomi's legal status, maintenance of Sophia's trust, and most surprisingly a proposed foundation in Daniel's name, with Naomi invited to help oversee its mission. But there was a condition. Naomi would agree to a voting trust arrangement. She would retain ownership of the shares, but allow voting control to be exercised jointly between her and 2 designated Harrison family members. Naomi read the proposal twice. She didn't smile, she didn't frown. Instead, she called James. "Let's schedule a meeting," she said. "I want them to hear my terms." The next day, Naomi sat across from Marcus, Elizabeth, and Thomas Harrison, with James at her side. Her tone was calm, controlled. "I accept the voting trust with amendments." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Such as? 1 seat for me, 1 for a family representative, and 1 third-party seat, a neutral member approved by both sides. No more closed doors." "And the foundation?" Elizabeth asked. Naomi nodded. "I'll lead it for the first year. After that, the board can vote on direction, but its focus will reflect Daniel's true passions: education, access, and family support." Marcus crossed his arms. "You've already won, Naomi. Why not take the money and run?" Naomi met his eyes. "Because Daniel didn't build his legacy just for himself. He built it for his daughter, and she won't grow up thinking it was given to her by force." For the first time, Marcus said nothing. Silence meant something was changing. That night, Naomi walked Sophia out onto the balcony. The sky above New York was pale with stars. "See that one?" Naomi pointed. "The brightest." Sophia nodded, clutching her drawing. "That's Daddy winking at us." Sophia looked up for a long time, then whispered, "I miss him." Naomi hugged her tight. "I do too, baby. But we're going to be okay. Because now, everyone knows who you are." As she carried Sophia back inside, Naomi knew the next fight would come in the form of media, public scrutiny, and social circles that whispered behind expensive cocktails. But she was ready, because she was no longer the secret. She was the storm. And she carried Daniel's light with her every step of the way. The morning of the funeral dawned grey and cold, like the sky itself was in mourning. Naomi Carter dressed Sophia in a simple black dress with white lace trim. The little girl, usually energetic and chatty, was quiet this morning. She clutched a folded drawing wand she'd made for her father just days before he passed. "Will everyone be nice to us today?" she asked softly, looking up at her mother. Naomi knelt down. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted gently. "But we're going to honor your daddy." That's what matters. A black car pulled up in front of the penthouse. Naomi took one last look in the mirror. Her hair was swept into a neat bun, her makeup minimal. She looked elegant, composed, and determined. Today wasn't just about saying goodbye to Daniel. It was about claiming her place beside him, publicly and without apology. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, the grand stone steps were already crowded with mourners, politicians, CEOs, press photographers, and family members who had once pretended she didn't exist. As Naomi stepped from the car, holding Sophia's hand, conversations around them fell into hushed whispers. "There she is. That's the wife, right? And the daughter." Naomi didn't flinch. She simply kept walking, head high, past the flashing cameras and into the cathedral's heavy doors. Inside, the Harrison family sat in their designated pews: Elizabeth, Thomas, Catherine, and of course Marcus. There was an empty space beside the casket. Daniel's seat. Naomi paused. Then, without waiting for permission, she walked to the front row and sat in the empty space with Sophia on her lap. A ripple moved through the pews behind her, but no one stopped her. Not this time. The ceremony began with stiff, rehearsed eulogies, one by Marcus, full of corporate accomplishments, one by an old business partner who spoke more about mergers than memories. But when the priest invited anyone close to Daniel Harrison to share a few words, Naomi stood. Gasps echoed like a cough in a silent room. She walked to the pulpit, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the pews, filled with power suits and carefully composed faces. "My name is Naomi Carter Harrison," she began, her voice steady, "and I was Daniel's wife for 8 years. A low murmur swept the crowd. Many of you didn't know that, she continued, because Daniel chose to protect our love from the expectations and judgments he grew up with. He made mistakes, yes. But he never stopped loving. Not me, not our daughter. Not even the family who made him feel he had to choose. She paused, glancing down at Sophia, who sat quietly beside the casket. I'm not here to expose anyone or shame anyone. I'm here to say goodbye to the man who changed my life, not because of what he gave me, but because of who he was when no one else was watching. The man who held my hand in the delivery room, who read bedtime stories in silly voices, who watched reruns of Jeopardy with a bowl of popcorn every Sunday night. Naomi's voice wavered. And the man who, despite everything, loved deeply, even when he couldn't show it. She stepped back. Silence filled the cathedral. Then, slowly, she returned to her seat, placing her hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Hymns, prayers, a procession. Naomi didn't register most of it. Her thoughts were with Daniel's eyes, the way they lit up when he held Sophia, the way they softened when he whispered, "I love you," in the middle of the night. At the cemetery, the casket was lowered into the ground. Roses were tossed in red, white, muted pink. Sophia walked forward and gently dropped her drawing in after them. "Bye, Daddy," she said clearly. "Don't forget to wink at me." Tears burned in Naomi's eyes. Even Marcus looked shaken. After the burial, James, Daniel's attorney, approached Naomi. "They've agreed to keep the will reading today." 3 p.m. at my office. She nodded. "I'll be there." Back at the penthouse, she changed into a more structured outfit, sleek navy with a high neckline, and called a close friend to watch Sophia. The little girl had earned a nap after the emotional morning, and Naomi needed to walk into that boardroom alone. At the law firm, the Harrisons were already seated when she arrived. The air was thick with tension. James cleared his throat. "This reading is per Mr. Harrison's final request. All documents have been notarized and reviewed." Naomi remained quiet as he began. The first few minutes were standard bequests to nieces, nephews, small charities. Then came the big reveal. "To my beloved wife, Naomi Carter Harrison, I leave the remainder of my estate." Gasps. "To my daughter, Sophia Elizabeth Harrison, I establish a trust." More gasps. Marcus turned red. Elizabeth looked pale. Catherine looked at the floor. Naomi didn't react. She didn't need to. Daniel had already said everything. Finally, James opened a sealed envelope marked, "To be read at the conclusion." It was a letter from Daniel. "To my family. I know this is not the ending you expected, but it's the one I chose. I chose Naomi. I chose Sophia, not out of rebellion, but out of love." He continued, speaking of regret, of legacy, of the difference between obligation and connection. He closed with, "Naomi, you once told me that love means showing up, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular. This is me showing up for you finally." When the letter ended, no one said a word. Naomi stood. "I have no interest in your money," she said quietly. "But I will defend Daniel's memory, and I will defend our daughter's future. You may not have known us, but now you do, and we're not going anywhere." She turned to leave, but just before she reached the door, Elizabeth spoke. "Naomi, wait." Naomi paused. Elizabeth stood slowly. "She has his eyes." Naomi nodded. "Yes, and his heart." Elizabeth's voice softened. "She deserves a family." Naomi's throat tightened. So did he. The air in James Whittaker's office still hung heavy with silence. Even after Naomi Carter Harrison had left the room, Daniel's words, read from his final letter, seemed to echo through every corner. No one moved. No one spoke, until Elizabeth Harrison did. "She has his eyes." That single sentence cracked something in the tension. And though no immediate truce was declared, it was the first drop of rain in a long drought of denial. The next morning, Naomi woke early. She stood by the large window in the penthouse living room, coffee in hand, watching the sun climb above the city. The warmth on her face felt like permission to breathe again. For the first time since Daniel's passing, she didn't feel like she was on defense. She felt present. Sophia padded out of her room in her fuzzy socks, her curly hair a sleepy halo around her face. "Did Daddy wink at us last night?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Naomi smiled, scooping her into a hug. "I think he did, sweetheart. I think he really did." That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Naomi opened it to find Emma Harrison, Daniel's niece, standing on the threshold, holding a worn leather book. "This was his," Emma said quietly. "His journal. I found it at the house." "He wrote about you." Naomi's breath caught. "I thought you should have it." "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she took it. Do you want to come in?" Emma nodded. Inside, the two women sat at the kitchen table. Naomi opened the journal, her eyes scanning pages of Daniel's familiar scrawl. Some entries were about business. Others were about books he loved, but many were about her and Sophia. There was one from the night Sophia was born. She came screaming into this world with my eyes and her mother's strength. "God help me, I've never loved anyone more." Naomi blinked away tears. "He was so afraid," Emma said, staring at her tea. "Afraid we'd reject you. Afraid we'd see you as a threat, not a gift." Naomi nodded. "He was right to worry. But I think maybe it's time to stop being afraid." On all sides, Emma looked up. "Would it be okay if I visited Sophia sometime? Not as a Harrison. Just as her cousin?" Naomi reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "She'd like that. So would I." Over the next few days, something shifted. Elizabeth sent a bouquet of flowers, white tulips and violets with a note tucked inside. "For strength and truth. I'm trying. I hope you'll give me the chance to do better." Even Marcus, once Naomi's fiercest opponent, called James Whittaker privately to request a meeting with her, not about the will, but about Sophia. "He said he wants to understand who his brother became," James relayed. "I told him that means understanding the woman who changed him." Naomi agreed to meet, but she brought Sophia with her. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe just outside the city. Marcus arrived in a dark coat, his expression unreadable. When Sophia saw him, she clutched Naomi's hand tightly. Naomi bent down. "It's okay. That's your Uncle Marcus." "Daddy's brother." Marcus knelt, eye level with the little girl. "Hello, Sophia," he said gently. "I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you sooner." "But I'm very glad to meet you now." Sophia studied him for a long moment, then nodded solemnly. "Daddy said you were good at fixing kites." Marcus blinked. Naomi smiled softly. "We told her once you helped Daniel fly a kite when they were kids." A flicker of something passed over his face. Maybe guilt, maybe memory. "I did," he said, "and if you ever want to fly one, I'd be honored to help." Sophia thought a moment, then said, "Okay. But only if Mummy comes too." For the first time in months, Marcus laughed. That afternoon, Naomi watched her daughter and Daniel's brother walking side by side along a quiet park trail. The barriers weren't gone, but they were lower, softer, like maybe, just maybe, a bridge could be built. Back at the penthouse, Naomi found herself rereading Daniel's journal. In one of the final entries, written weeks before his diagnosis, he'd penned, "They say legacy is about buildings, companies, fortunes. But what if it's not? What if the only thing worth leaving behind is proof that you loved and were loved in return?" She closed the book and held it to her chest. That night, as she tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl asked a question. "Mommy, are we still hiding?" Naomi sat beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "No, baby," she said softly. We're not hiding anymore. Not even from the mean people. Especially not from them, Sophia smiled. Then can I take the picture of Daddy to school tomorrow? Naomi nodded. Of course. He'd like that. The 1-year anniversary of Daniel Carter's passing arrived not with sorrow, but with sunlight. Naomi stood on the back patio of the newly renovated cottage just outside of Montauk, watching Sophia chase bubbles across the yard. Laughter echoed through the garden. Sophia's, yes, but also from Emma, from Elizabeth, and even from Marcus, who knelt by a grill, poking nervously at overcooked hot dogs with the caution of a man more accustomed to boardrooms than barbecues. This wasn't what Naomi had envisioned a year ago. Then she was grieving, isolated, fighting tooth and nail just to be seen. Today, she was part of something. Something messy, still tender but real. Family. The journey had not been easy, but neither had it been for nothing. Naomi sipped her lemonade and stepped back into the house, passing a framed photograph in the hallway. Daniel holding baby Sophia, both grinning, his eyes crinkled in that way that still made her heart ache. She placed a hand on the frame. We're okay, she whispered. The Andrew Carter Foundation, named after Daniel's father, but now restructured with Daniel's final wishes, had quietly become Naomi's full-time calling. As executive director, she now oversaw grant distributions for underserved school districts, health initiatives for low-income families, and an arts scholarship program started in Daniel's name. Every letter from a student, every thank you from a struggling single parent, reminded her of why Daniel had fought so hard to protect what they built. It was more than just wealth. It was legacy. Sophia tugged at her dress. Mommy, Emma says I can do the toast. Can I? Naomi crouched. A toast? Sophia nodded, eyes wide with importance. Like a grown-up. Naomi smiled. Then let's do it right. She led her daughter back outside, where a picnic table was filled with homemade food, hand-picked flowers, and glasses of sparkling cider for the kids. The Harrisons, still getting used to this new rhythm of inclusion, gathered with curious eyes. Sophia climbed onto the bench, Emma helping her stand. The crowd fell quiet. Sophia held up her plastic cup. This is for Daddy, she said, because he was the best secret ever. There was a beat of stunned silence, then soft laughter, and even a few tears. He kept us in a hiding box, she went on. But now we're out, and I like being out. Daddy said he'd be a star, and he is. I see him every night, and sometimes he winks. Naomi pressed a hand over her heart. Sophia looked at her mother. And Mommy says love doesn't end when someone's gone. It just changes shape. She raised her cup higher. So, this is for love. Because Daddy said it's what makes a family. Clink. The cups tapped together, a quiet, sweet moment of closure and beginning all at once. After the toasts, Naomi wandered into the garden to collect herself. The soft rustle of lavender and rosemary surrounded her, and wind danced through the trees overhead. Marcus approached a moment later, hands awkwardly jammed in his pockets. She's something else, he said. She's Daniel, Naomi answered, but stronger. They stood in silence for a moment. I've submitted the updated trust documents, Marcus said. Sophia's voting rights are secure, and I added an educational clause she can direct funds from her portion to any school initiative she believes in. Naomi looked at him. That's generous. It's overdue. He hesitated, then continued. You know, I used to think the company was the most important thing we had, that preserving the name was everything. He looked out across the garden. But then that little girl stood up and reminded all of us what the name's supposed to mean. Naomi touched his arm lightly. Thank you, he nodded, then retreated. Inside, Emma showed Naomi the article in the latest Forbes Women, a half-page profile of Naomi and the Foundation's work titled, From Shadow to Strength. Naomi laughed. I never thought I'd be in a magazine, especially one that didn't call me a scandal. Emma grinned. Times change. And you changed them. That night, after the family had left and Sophia was asleep in her new room, decorated with planets, stars, and astronaut decals, Naomi sat alone on the porch. She opened a small wooden box containing the emerald ring Daniel had given her, his journal, and a worn photograph of the beach where they were married. She didn't cry. She smiled, because the silence no longer echoed with loss, it hummed with peace. She pulled out Daniel's last letter and reread the final line. When the world finally sees you the way I did, I'll rest easy. Until then, I'll be the star you can always find. She glanced up. A single steady star shone above the tree line. Found you, she whispered. In the quiet moments after loss, we often discover the true meaning of love and legacy. Andrew's story reminds us that no amount of wealth or social standing can replace the simple, enduring power of family and truth. For years, he lived in fear of judgment, hiding the woman and daughter who brought him real joy. But in the end, love demanded to be seen. This story teaches us that it's never too late to make things right, never too late to stand up for the people who matter most. Whether you're young or entering your golden years, the lesson is the same. What we build in secret will always crave the light. Legacy is not just about money or reputation. It's about the people we love, the truth we protect, and the courage to stand beside those we believe in, no matter the cost. So ask yourself, have you told the people you love how much they mean to you? Have you made room in your legacy for truth, even if it's uncomfortable? Because sometimes healing a family begins with simply being seen,